All right, hello everybody. Welcome to a discussion of Fugitive Prince by Janny Wurts. This is the fourth book in the Wars of Light and Shadow, and it is also the first book of the third arc in the Wars of Light and Shadow, which is called the Alliance of Light. And I think we are going to dive straight into spoilers because this is the fourth book in a series and there's no point really. We do have other discussions though, before you run away. We have other discussions. If you're curious about this series, we've done a video with Janny Wurts herself that is essentially a non-spoiler discussion of the series, focusing on Curse of the Mistwraith, but really the series as a whole. Really fun, engaging discussion. You have to hear Janny Wurts if you've never heard her before, and hear some of her intentions and inspirations and influences for this series. It's just tremendous. But since we are 4 books in, we are just going to dive right in. So if you have not read Fugitive Prince, you probably will want to sign out, unless you just love hearing spoilers, which is fine too. So with that, let me introduce my wonderful guests. I have here AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon, looking slightly incorporeal, so I did rename him appropriately. I know it's the lighting and the whole background thing, but you do look a little bit like an incorporeal sorcerer.
I've gone a bit ghostly for this one. Philip, as ever, a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to be speaking with you and Johanna about this series. And I think it comes as no surprise to anyone that I am really enjoying this series. That, you know, my heart's on my sleeve with this one. Like I'm not trying to disguise the fact that I am genuinely enjoying some great writing, some beautiful writing, and a fascinating world that just gets deeper and deeper and more complex as we go along. That's something that had initially appeared relatively straightforward. Each volume is peeling back this other layer and adding depth to it and adding complexity to it. And I'm enjoying the journey.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's fantastic. This is a rich, rich series. It is deep and it is vast, and we are finding out more and more about all of that as we progress in the series. So my other guest is Johanna, and it is so wonderful to see you today, Johanna, and to discuss this. And I'm eager to hear your thoughts. How are you finding it so far, the series as a whole?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm finding this series very interesting so far. I'll be honest, this fourth book was probably my least favorite so far. I did feel like, and part of that I think is because it does take its time. We're setting up a new arc, so there's a lot in place. But I have to say that there were so many things that I found really exciting to talk about in this particular book. And I especially got excited with the way it ended. So yes, I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, I did experience it myself, and that is, I think, often something I notice about writers whose work I really enjoy, that I can really get immersed in, is that it's often kind of a slow start, and then you before you realize it, you're hooked, and the ending is usually what really just goes much quicker than the rest.
Mhm.
So that happened for me in this one for sure. So yeah. AP's giggling because I just finished reading the book 3 minutes before we started recording our meeting. So I was reading fast.
No wonder the end flew by. It's like, oh, I'm having this meeting. Oh, quickly get through the book. Oh yeah, so he got stabbed in the head. Fine, moving on, moving on.
I read every word. I cannot, there is just something in me that cannot skip words. So I read every word, but I did read a little faster at the end. So, but anyway, this was a wonderful read, and I'm very excited to get your thoughts. Let's start with a favorite moment from the two of you. Let's hear about a favorite moment from this book, because there are several standout moments to me, and I'd like to hear what you guys think are some of the important standouts. And we'll be sure, we'll do our best to cover all the major players as we discuss these moments in Fugitive Prince. So we'll just go in the same order, I guess. AP, would you like to start us off?
Well, there's one standout moment that I really want to talk about, but the exploration of magic here, the grim ward, the trying to map the warding in the sky. The, there is so much in this book that had that exploration of the magic and deepening our understanding of how this world works and its functions and its philosophies. And then you have that balanced against the incredibly tragic, heartrending story of Talith. And that was something that entire sequence, what she went through and the journey that we've seen her go from the early books to now, that that really struck a chord with me. I thought her scenes, her story is incredibly emotive, and that was something that really stood out to me. But the one tiny little sequence that I wanted to talk about, and it was something I actually noted the quotation for, was when Arathon in fighting with Kale and Dakar
Hmm.
after the triggering of the curse
This is in the inn.
in the inn,
Yeah.
we see him transition from Arathon into the Master of Shadows. The thing that Lysair has been telling everyone that he is, saying we have to fear this thing. He is this demon, this monster.
Hmm.
We actually see it happen. And Wurts does an amazing job communicating this. And if you'll forgive me, I'll read the quote. It's quite short.
Sure. I'll forgive you.
Both men felt fatigue. The fight lagged a split second. Dakar, looking up, caught a glimpse of green eyes. The prince who was born to Cephalan, compassion, whose music could raise tears from stone hearts for generosity, appeared to be vanquished beyond recall. Soulless, inhuman, the creature who advanced to take down his own liegeman seemed unreal as a fetch wrought into the form of a dreadfully familiar body. Lips peeled back in murdering ferocity, the master of shadow lunged again.
Hmm.
And it's just in that moment we see how Arathon is physically transformed into this demonic form, this creature. It's reflected in how all of those aspects of him are twisted and shaped by the curse. And he becomes, to Dakar's eyes, a completely different person. He changes from being Arathon to becoming the Master of Shadow, the thing that is feared, this fetch, this nightmare creature. And it's so wonderful that you start this paragraph with, here's Arathon. We recognize his green eyes. We recognize his compassion. We recognize his musicality. But he is transformed, and this is what he becomes. So it starts with Arathon, and it ends with the Master of Shadow. And I loved that transition. I loved how Wurts communicated the the starkness of this transition, how he could be confused. This character that we've come to know, how he could be confused with this demon, because that demon is within him and it is all consuming. It is every facet of his being is transformed. And I just thought it was powerfully done. It was wonderfully evocative. And the thing about Wurtz's writing is there are moments like that throughout. That's how carefully she has constructed sentences and paragraphs and scenes, that resonance, that communication, that sequencing of information is always that careful. And that is one of the reasons why that scene sticks out to me so much. I thought it was just a wonderful use in a very short paragraph, communicating this power of how you tell the story, not just what you do. It's not Arathon turned into the Master of Shadows. Like, that's the information we get.
Mhm.
But how Wurts relays it gives it power, gives it impetus, gives it drama, gives it weight, and makes it immersive and imaginative, which is what I love in reading this.
It also illustrates, I think, the irony that Lysair is going on and on about the danger to the world from this evil, master of shadows. And you could argue that he's the one that is creating this because of his relentless pursuit. Now, it is obviously he's under the geash of the curse of the Mistwraith, and he is driven by it as well. But it's his manipulations. And in this case, of course, the Coriathane are using his hair or a talisman or whatever to elicit that response from Arathon. But it's all part of a plan of which Lysair is aware, and he is the one who is bringing about this transformation in some form of Arathon. And it is tragic because, of course, he's positioning himself as this figure of light and goodness. And, we keep seeing how he is so charismatic and how he is really casting this narrative out there that his Arathon is evil incarnate, and that he is the only savior of the world. And he's even getting theology into it now, because he's bringing in these priest-like figures who are becoming part of his state apparatus, and they are starting to go after sorcery and all of that, and they're whipping up the people into a kind of a state of fear and obedience. And so you can really see where this is going, and it's kind of frightening, isn't it?
Very much so. Yes. That's interesting. I really love that paragraph that you read, AP, and everything that you had to say about it. I actually had some misconceptions after that entire scenario, because it seemed like he was able to wound Kel. I don't know how you say his name. I'm sorry.
Kale.
Kale.
Kale, like not quite like the kale that you would eat, but
not quite like kale. Yeah. And I got the impression later on, when Kale was being taken prisoner, they talked about wounds festering on his forearms. And I thought, oh, did the curse come out through Arathon and did it infect Kale? That was where my mind went. And I was wrong, but but it was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting to see that side of Arathon for sure. And I think there's a lot in this book about violence needing a target, in a sense. Like, if we took these two men apart, would Lysair calm down? Like, if Arathon were taken out of the picture, if he were killed, would Lysair just calm down? Though it doesn't seem like that's the case. And I also, especially with this whole edict on slavery, all that, I think the one moment, though, that's probably my favorite moment in this book. There are actually quite a few moments I could talk about in depth, but the one that hit me the hardest emotionally was the trial scene with Lysair at the beginning of the book, with the Ath Brotherhood figure, and with, I think it's Sethvir. I'm not sure which fellowship member was there, where they're confronting him in Althane Tower.
Yeah, I think it was Sethvir.
Yeah, where they're confronting him. And there were so many things about that scene that I found interesting, because it seemed like there's so much in this book, and so much about the major balance being about consent and free will. And yet they did kind of force Lysair into this situation, saying, look, you're under this curse. It's, again, another confrontation about this. And it's a much, much heavier confrontation than what we saw in the Ath Brotherhood Forest Sanctuary area in the last book. And that whole entire scene, for whatever reason, I think it could have been multiple things for me personally. It could have been things I was going through at the time personally too, when I was reading it. But I felt this terror and fear. It felt otherworldly. It felt immersive, like what AP was saying. It was crazy to me, the way that she was able to talk about that scene, because I think for me, I saw Lysair in that moment almost, they're not going to be the same, of course, but I kind of saw him almost like a Lucifer character, this very handsome Lucifer character who's very cunning, very, very intelligent, very persuasive, very influential. And yet, like, seeing his breakdown, seeing his resistance, seeing like every force of what seems to be intention towards good, though I did question that here and there, to get him to relent, saying, you can't control the fact you hate this man, but you need to stop. You need to stop with this edict towards slavery, and you need to stop uh, trying to attack Erathon because you're under this curse influence, and he just can't give it up. So I don't know, there was something about that particular scene for me that really shook me up. Yeah, I thought it was pretty scary.
Brilliant.
What's fascinating for me is that scene actually gains new context because of the little section that I referred to. And it's when Lysair thinks about or sees Arathon, he sees what Dakar saw in that moment. That is all Lysair can see of Arathon. He cannot see the Arathon that we see.
Right.
He sees the Master of Shadows. He sees that demonic creature because anytime he thinks about him, that's what the curse is warping that mental image into.
Right.
And that sequence where Dakar sees it is a moment that actually made me sympathize even a tiny bit for what Lysair is going through. Because if you are aware of someone that evil, that dangerous, that destructive and demonic, what lines would you cross to protect people? And right, it doesn't absolve Lysair of him being an ass. Particularly if you recall in one of the previous books, Lysair had that wonderfully performative no man will be a slave in my land, and I will be shackled. Shackle me before you shackle one of these men.
Yes.
This whole thing. And it's slavery for the boats. Yeah, that'll be grand. Don't worry about it. Sure, we don't like them anyway. Stick them, make them slaves. And you see that he doesn't have a pure ideology. Everything is what is expedient.
Yeah, he's a hypocrite and a showman, and
he is such a hypocrite.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, he's becoming less and less. There were parts of me that really liked him in the earlier books, but prior to the curse taking effect, and again, is it his fault? You know, how much of it is his doing? It's kind of a tough one.
Well, he stuck his finger in the dam,
I guess. Oh dear. So you mentioned kale earlier. Kale.
We should look it up. It's probably, I mean, she has a pronunciation
I mean, I did
guide,
look it
so
up.
I
I
feel
think it's kale with a slight on the end. But anyway,
too.
I felt like some of the secondary characters were some of my favorite moments in this book, actually. And Kale, starting with him and his determination and his loyalty and dedication, I thought were all very moving. And his first, just that he insisted on tailing Erathon and being his shield. And even when Erathon stabs him, literally, of course, he's under the influence of the curse. Everything he does is with Erathon's welfare in mind. But his moment of absolute just determination to help Erathon is on the ship when he manages to get the better of Lyrenda. And doing so in the most awful fashion when he dispatches the woman who had been healing him, and you can sense that he feels nauseous about it. It's awful, but he's determined to do this service. And so when he ditches her crystal in the salt water after heating it up, and she withers into, there was quite a scene, really. There's some great description, like some of the descriptions of Moriel as being like a spider in a web, and all of it. I mean, some pretty,
and her translucent skin. Yeah.
There's some really great descriptive stuff in here. Very evocative, atmospheric stuff. But
yes.
Kale, I thought, okay, he really, I mean, that was very moving that he managed, and you knew he wasn't going to make it, but he made the best of what he could do. And in fact, it turned defeat into triumph there for Erathon's side of things, at least. So I thought that was really quite nice.
Yeah, actually, by the way, I looked it up really quickly, and it says Kale, and with the E nearly subliminal. I don't know if she means like a schwa, like
like a schwa.
Kale.
Yeah, I think.
So it's not Kaylee then, the way that I've
I think we're all saying
having a
it
bit of a
wrong.
dance.
Kayala is how she has it spelled out. So like Kay dash ALL dash E.
Okay.
Kayala.
So what were you going to
Oops.
say?
Well, one of the things that I find interesting is when Arathon is overtaken by the curse and attacks Kayla, we go, oh yeah, but that was the curse. When Lysair does something, and we go, yeah, Lysair's evil. You're like, under the influence of the curse.
Right.
What? And one of the things that I have found absolutely fascinating in this is how Wurts keeps making me loathe Lysair more and more.
Yeah.
But also pity him.
Same here. Yes.
Well, let's talk about Talith then, because I think that's
Yes.
where you really see this. Am I right? I mean, with the relationship between him and Talith, and how in his mind it got poisoned because she did not show utter loyalty and belief in him. After in the earlier books, she had been abducted and used as a bit of a pawn, and she saw Arathon for what he was and tried to explain that to Lysair, and he would not hear it, and it poisoned their whole relationship. And he put her aside, and this is all the while feeling still very much in love with her, and eventually. Because she, being strong-willed, was not going to have it being put away like that, and led to him deciding to imprison her, and her taking measures into her own hands, and eventually he doesn't realize it yet, but his minister there orchestrated her death. Blink and you miss it. She did not commit suicide. It was that guy had the archer shoot the rope that she was trying to escape, and he killed her. So I think when Lysair finds out, I wouldn't want to be that particular manipulative fellow who I can't remember his name, but you know who I'm talking about.
I think Lysair is too far gone. But something you mentioned there, that Lysair sees that she has been disloyal, but she hasn't in any way been disloyal. But Lysair sees that because she does not believe 100% everything that he says, and offered a contrary opinion, even while still supporting him.
Yeah.
That wasn't enough. And he wants people just to agree with him. And he cannot countenance. And again, it's if he accepts for a single instant that Arathon is not as demonic as he is saying, then everything that he has done, all of these moral lines that he has crossed, all of these terrible things that he has done for no reason. Except his own will. And that I think is this aspect of Lysair that each time he is confronted with, we see it in that judgment scene at the start that Johanna pointed out, that if he admits this, that then he has to admit that he did it, that he did these evil things.
Yes, that's directly said in the book too. That he would have to accept that he's the one who's responsible for the deaths of all the innocents that he's projecting onto Arathon as being responsible for.
And that is, you see this weight of that, every single thing that he has done now and continues to do. It's this road to hell that is being paved with these things. It is weighing him down, brick upon brick. And once they've been added, he cannot escape them. Because if he admits that, no, this is all his fault, then they all fall on him. He's he's been pushing all of this weight, all of this immorality onto Arathon, and hiding behind that justification of the ends justify the means. And you take that away, and nothing justifies the means. And his treatment of Talith is heartrending, because we see that he had genuine affection for her. To call it love, that I mean, it depends on your interpretation of the word love. But I like to think that he was at least affectionate towards her and liked her. And it wasn't just about the power and privilege that courting her gave him, and it wasn't just about her social position, or something as superficial as how good looking she was.
I would go as far as to say he was obsessed with her, actually, but that he regarded that obsession as a potential weakness, and therefore there was this tension within him. I have to be so dedicated to my cause that I will put aside my obsession for this beautiful woman.
That sounds like Lorenda a little bit.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, a similar dynamic in
We're
a
gonna
way.
have to talk about
Yeah.
in a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead,
Sorry,
Phil.
though, were you finished with that thought, AP?
Well, no, because I wanted to point out that then he gave that very public reason for basically why she was being set aside, was that, she couldn't bear his children because, well, it,
Kind of hard to do when you're not going anywhere near her, right? Yeah.
yeah, you need two to tango. And so he was setting her aside for being barren. And of course, she then, after this mental torture, physical torture, this imprisonment, finds a way to become impregnated, to prove that she is actually fertile. She isn't barren. She can't be set aside the way that Lysair has said that she can.
Right.
And then that's proof of, oh, well, you were up here, then you must have had sexual congress with the demon. That's the only way that this could have happened. And you see that religious zealotry, fervor, and fanaticism now casting every single element, anything that happens, it must be read in that light. And we see how that is overtaking this whole society. And she becomes the victim of it. She becomes the victim of these machinations of power hungry, power grubbing, small men who are just as dismissive of Lysair. They are using Lysair to get what they want. They have no belief in him. They have no belief in the cause. They are small, tiny men, and they take it out on those that they feel they can. They're bullies.
Like
And we see so
minstrels.
much of that in the people surrounding Lysair.
Yeah.
Like, I guess, especially that's established in the council scene, probably at the beginning, because they don't really want to follow Lysair. They don't really want to make him crowned king, and then he refuses to the crown. Interesting, the politics there. And I would say that influence too, on Lysair happens even after Caleb dies. I think that was so, for one thing, I have to say, I was so upset when Caleb died. I didn't see that coming, and I loved her character so much. I loved her so, so much, and I was so upset. But that aside, what's interesting about all that is that, well, a few things, so several things. One is who got her pregnant, because it seemed like she was,
It was a
what?
page.
Oh, it was a page? Was that
Yeah,
said?
so Mern refused to do the
Yes.
deed because he couldn't mix his bloodline. And
Mhm.
by the way, I want to talk about him too, because he was another one who stole the show for me.
There's a lot to talk about with Marin.
Yeah.
Go ahead, though.
But yeah, just to be clear about what you were talking about, he refused, but then she said, "All right, if you're not going to do it for me, then please deliver this for me." She had it arranged with him, so it wasn't on page, but he basically conveyed the message, told this young fella, "Hey, she's waiting for you," and the deed was done. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Oh, okay. I got the impression he was going to send someone along. I guess I just missed the page part, but anyhow, it happened, and I think what really actually moved me to tears, honestly, was the moment when he found out about Taylor's death, and I was a little confused about that too, because
Yeah.
it seemed like we went to a different storyline after Taylor's death. And for a while there, it seemed like time had passed. And so I thought when we returned to Lysair's character, and that was when he was interacting with Lorenda, I thought at this point he knew. And so I was kind of confused why they were talking about her like she was still alive.
Yeah, he
It
was
took me a
away.
while to, yeah, it took me a while to understand what was happening. But then when he was told, I felt pity for him. That was the moment I felt pity for Lysair.
Even
And
Lorenda did too. Yeah.
yes, Lorenda did too. I love, by the way, we have to talk about that too. But the thing is that I felt pity for him, and it was just moments after processing this and taking in the grief of her death that he starts to twisted around again, just like the earlier scene. It suddenly just makes Erathon all the more demonic, all the more responsible. Like, this would have never happened if not for Erathon, because he's the one who influenced her and caused this all to happen in the first
And he
place.
can't see any of his own responsibility in this.
No,
Yeah.
Well, of course
no.
not. He's entirely blameless. Like he's perfect. Like, why would you blame him?
Yeah. Yeah, and I liked Lorenda's part in that particular scene. I'll just go ahead and jump there because
Yeah.
is it okay if I pivot to Lorenda? Did
Yeah,
anybody
let's
want to
do it.
talk more
Yeah.
about?
We want to talk
Okay.
about her anyway. So yeah.
Fascinating character too. I have to say, I might have a little bit of bias towards the female characters in this series. I just love them so much. So with Lorenda, really fascinating because we've seen thus far in the series how she's contrasted with Moriel, how Moriel is so much more, well, I mean, the woman is over what, 10 centuries years old. And it seems like even though Lorenda is not a newborn babe, she still is quite naive. She still doesn't know how to like not fall under the influence of lusting for power. And we get a little more insight into her background and how she was brought up, I think, under very strict, like, I don't know, her parents were very strict on her, and she became a very self-loathing perfectionist and holds very high standards for herself. She seems to value autonomy more than anything, and then that seems to conflict with her internal drive when she ends up having that compassion inspiration from Erathon. Like, she ends up falling for Erathon somehow. I had a hard time getting behind that, to be honest with you. The fact that she was deciding that as a Koryani, she was going to work with Lysair and the Alliance in order to bring Erathon down.
Well,
It
she doesn't want to be dependent on him or love stricken, that sort of thing, because it would threaten, as you say, her
for
independence,
autonomy. Yeah.
autonomy. And so this has happened, by the way, because at one point she was essentially inhabiting Ilera.
Mm-hmm.
And
Book
it
one.
was Ilera's feelings for Erathon that sort of transferred to Lorenda, and that presented that weakness in her.
I thought that was a little childish, I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
Because it just brought me back to like, okay, when I was in second grade, I had a crush on a boy and I started bullying him because I didn't like that I had a crush on him.
You
You know,
bullied somebody, Jordan?
maybe. Anyway, you didn't need to know that. Anyway, but
I
I
am
thought
shocked, Johanna. That you
I mean,
okay.
the whole assassin thing started early.
Speechless.
Yeah.
I just couldn't have it. I couldn't have that. I couldn't let a guy have have power over me like that. So I understood her from that perspective, but I thought it was a little hard for me to get behind her at that moment. But I did feel for her. I ended up feeling for her even when
Ayla.
Kale ended up getting her crystal, her quartz. Ah, there's so much I want to talk about in this book. It keeps on flooding back to me. But I especially loved later on, though, when she was there witnessing that she was the perspective witnessing Lysair
Yeah.
go through his grief and understanding his influence. And I think it's that lust for autonomy that actually saves her in that moment. That's what crossed my mind because she saw how charismatic he was, how easy it would be to want to suddenly be of service to Lysair, to be under his influence like so many other people. And at the same time, her Koryani training and her desire, her need for autonomy, I think pulls her back. And also contrasting hatred, because obviously she sees herself as hating Erathon, but she sees the hatred she had towards Erathon is not nearly on the same level as this crusade level of hatred that Lysair has towards Erathon. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was an interesting exploration throughout the book, is like differing motivation levels as far as hatred is concerned. But I did find her character so fascinating to follow. And I also I felt for her when I like Moriel too. I want to talk about her too later, but
We can.
I felt for her too because I knew and I knew, by the way, at the end, did you all predict that her plan was going to be to get Ilera,
Oh,
to use
yeah.
Ilera as a pawn? That was pretty easy to see that was gonna happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Brilliant. AP thoughts on Miranda or anything that Joanna just covered?
She is a great character because I love to hate her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as Joanna pointed out, you understand her. Here was this woman, this very self-assured, powerful, the heir to this magical organization. And in a single instant, because she had to look at this memory, inhabit this memory, and see it the way that the person who perceived it and had the memory, how they had done it, with all of those emotions tied up into it, and the soul of this beautiful artist in full view. That one instant has dashed her plans that she has been spending decades trying to fulfill. And so you can understand why she's just a tiny bit peeved at Arathon, because even though Arathon had no control over this, he is the reason she is on the outs with Moriel. She is the reason that her succeeding Moriel is being called into question. And it's everything about this. So she's quite understandable and her motivation. And the more that we delve into her, the more that Wurts reveals about her backstory, her character, what she went through to get to this position, it chips away at those initial surface level assumptions we make about characters. And they start to deepen and broaden and widen and become more complex. And, this is something that we see in narrative all the time, that you go, that's the bad guy. Nice little pigeonhole. There's the good guy. Nice little pigeonhole. And yet one of the things that a lot of us seem to genuinely love is when that simplistic binary gets complicated. Arathon, is shown in a great light, and we forgive him so much of what he does because of the curse. And yet Lysair, we don't forgive for the curse. And it's that confrontation about our bias, about how this story is being told, and we're being constantly made aware of it. Why do you let him get away with it and you don't let him get away with it in these moments? Why do you hate this person but like that person? And we start seeing parallels between so many of the characters, that they share aspects and motivations and backstories, and yet have ended up on different sides, have ended up in these different factions. And each time we get these little insights further and further into characters, particularly like any of the ones basically on the side of light.
The Alliance of Light. Yes.
It complicates the picture. Yes, there are some loathsome characters, but Lorenda, you look at it and you go, I don't agree with her. I want to hit her on the page, but I'm starting to understand her a lot more now. And with that understanding comes that inability to hit the surface level, that you go, right, she's still not on the, I still disagree with her, but can I really hit her? Well, I really hate Moriel. Yes, I'm going to hit her. She's a spidery, evil web.
Oh, I love Moriel.
We'll talk about her in a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that complexity, I think, extends from the characters to the relationships between them as well. You look at the Alliance of Light, and what you have is a patchwork of people with some temporarily aligned interests. But you look at the relationship of the Coriathane, for example, to Lysair, and you see it in these scenes, like when Lysair brings Lyrenda to the top of the cliff where she can see what he's going to do to that ship. And he, by the way, what kind of nutcase is he? I mean, that's justice. That's justice.
That's what we call it in this day and age, gaslighting, in my opinion.
I mean, she pretty much calls it what it is murder. You're a manslayer, dude.
I know. And she's like, he's basically blaming it on her. That's your fault.
That's your fault. See, Zap. That's your fault. I just did that. It's your fault, but it really, and then that a few pages later, as you said, she's witnessing him finding out about Talith, and she feels for him genuinely. And so there's complexity in this relationship. They're using each other. There are moments of humanity between them. There are moments of distrust and outright hostility. It's really interesting to see all these relationships play
And
out.
yes, and I'll just go ahead and add, there was even a moment earlier on before Kale got power, when he was her prisoner, there was even a moment where she was looking at him. I think he was unconscious. I can't remember exactly, but she had a moment where she thought, I kind of can connect to him because they
Yeah.
both cared so much about Erathon,
Yeah.
even though she was trying to fight that in herself. But she recognized some kind of weird connection with Kale. And Kayla. So I thought that was really I thought that
Yeah.
was really interesting. Like she is there are just like interesting little seeds here and there. And I think that speaks to what exactly I loved what you were saying, AP, because I think that's something that's very special that Wurts is doing in this series is really trying to challenge our assumptions and our perceptions of people and giving us more to think about, filling in more of the picture. You think this about this character, but what if I give you this and this and this? I
Yeah.
feel like she does a very similar thing, but in a different way into Right House Chasm, playing
Mhm.
on that.
Yeah.
That dual perception. Yeah.
Yeah, she liked Kale in a way, but she would have really loved his cousin Broccoli even more. Sorry. Sorry, Janny Wurts. Sorry.
Sorry.
Anyway, Moriel, I think it's time to talk about Moriel,
Oh, I love
because
Mario.
this is the spider at the center of the web, and I absolutely adored the descriptions of her. Were just brilliantly evocative and atmospheric. So thoughts on Moriel? Either of you want to just go for it? Go ahead.
Yes, I do want to go for it,
All
but
right.
AP, you can go for it first if you want to.
Well, thank you. Because I think what I want to talk, I think you're going to have a far more interesting view. So I'll get my stuff out of the way quickly so I can sit and listen to what you have to say.
Sorry. Go ahead. Take your
Because
time.
for Moriel, one of the things that I love is, again, not only the distinction that's being drawn between her and the Fellowship, but the similarities between her and the Fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost the slight differences in philosophy set them diametrically opposed, but they're actually very, very similar. They do similar things. They manipulate people in a similar way, although they are governed by different principles. And with Moriel, I'm reminded of obviously like the Bene Gesserit in Frank Herbert's Dune universe,
That
Yeah.
came to my
the
mind
Aes
too.
Sedai in Robert Jordan, but the Koreanic, they are their own thing. But obviously, like these big, powerful matriarchal orders that we've seen in other series, that's immediately where my mind go to for comparison. But the fact that her longevity is a torture,
Yeah.
it isn't a natural longevity. Like, Bilbo had said, it's like too little butter spread over too much bread. That she is spread paper thin. And that is a tremendous burden for her, a pain, a level of suffering. And she is still dedicated to her cause. And again, we see this. The cause overrides everything, just like Lysair and just like the Fellowship. They have their cause at the center of what they are doing as well. It just so happens that we are more sympathetic to what the Fellowship are doing.
There are these
But
touches though that are genuinely like, so the initiate that fails her in that ritual, she gives her a magical lobotomy, That's creepy.
Oh, I wrote that down too. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, like, again, not saying I like her.
Okay.
Oh, I do. I still love her, but go ahead.
But that power of ideology to shape and justify your actions, and that is something that we keep returning to over and over again. When the clansmen say, according to tradition, we must do this thing, that's remarkably inconvenient timing for us to be doing this thing. Yes, but this is what must be done. It must follow the forms. It must follow tradition. You must do it this way. They are just as tied into these ideological positions as all these other factions, but they are less destructive in the moment. And we don't see them doing quite so many horrific things. But to return to Moriel, her sinister nature, her willing to sacrifice people, all for what she sees as the greater good,
For the order. Yeah.
and to return supremacy to humans.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is really, really interesting, because that is at the core of a lot of this. That the fellowship and what we're seeing on that side and the clansmen is about understanding and being part of the world.
And it's
Pravian law. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But what we see with the Coriani and what we see with Lysair, the supremacy of humanity, and the world should serve humans.
I
Yeah.
love
And
that. Yeah.
that I see, becoming more and more distinct, more and more apparent. And it's fascinating how that colors our perception of what they do. Because what the Fellowship do to Lysair, removing him from the compact, removing him from grace, like Lucifer having his wings stripped from him. He has been removed from a state of grace in this world. That is horrendous. And they feel bad about having to do it.
Yeah.
But that was pretty powerful and horrendous. But we don't judge them the same way that we do these other characters. And that's what I love. And she is part of this. So
Yes, 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 to everything you just said. And especially because after that scene where they have that confrontation with Lysair, where he has his wings clipped, so to speak, that was beautifully said. Perfectly said. Um, she comes into the scene then, and they have that conversation. And I think it's Sethvir, I'm pretty sure it's Sethvir, who says they're not Lysair and Erathon are not puppets to be played with. And she says, but aren't they? Like, what are you all doing? Like, come on. You can't escape the fact that you're playing this puppet game. And I love that. I noticed, by the way, it did not escape me that later on in the book, there was a scene in which, okay, and I'm saying this because I think this is the way that we're made to see the Fellowship versus the Coriani, because there was this one particular scene where I think it's, oh, is it Traith? Traith is talking to Jirrit about finding Erathon and company in the Grimoire. And Jirrit volunteers himself. Oh, I'm so loyal. I'm so loyal to to Erathon. Yes, use me. And he does this kind of like astral, I don't know if it was astral travel or I don't know. It was some kind of magic to help them orient out of the Grimoire. And it seemed like he was doing so willingly out of his own free will. And then the next scene, you have the Cirrus and you have Moriel, and Moriel is forcing the Cirrus to say, oh, you have to do it out of your free will, but you're going to do this. You're going to go spy on Lorenda for me.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting if you look at those two scenes in contrast with one another. And I know Janny did that. I'm sure Janny Wurts did that purposefully, like right after one another. But I also think there's so many little things in the writing that are kind of playing off that instinct. I know that you've before on your channel, AP, have talked about physiognomy or the way that in fantasy, especially, and I just read a book about this called Disfigured, how this was more about disability in fantasy, but even just things like looking at a woman who is elderly and making her the old crone witch, evil character, or looking at, somebody who is older and with a beard and, being the fatherly Gandalf kind of good guy. And I feel like we're kind of made to see that, have that perception, but there are also little things here in the story. Like, for example, the fact that Moriel has a deaf servant, a servant that she made deaf. And then the Fellowship sorcerer ends up curing the deafness.
Yeah.
There were just so many little things like that. But at the same time, looking at big picture things, just like you said, AP, the Coriani is on the side of humanity. And yet it seems like at the same time, there's Lysair and the Alliance. There's this big colonialism theme, and it's been there since book one. I feel like it took over big time. It was so prominent for me in this particular book. But then there's the clansmen and the Fellowship who are all about Paravian law. And Moriel's argument is, well, the Paravians aren't here anymore, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, that's a big contrast. The dominance of humanity versus the idea of balance with nature. And I think you see it over and over again. I mentioned the scene where she gives the initiate the magical lobotomy, and contrasted with that is you have Sethir giving Asandir magical acupuncture to help him, get better after he helps rescue Erathon and from that Grim Ward and everything. So I mean, there's their idea of them being in balance with the world and asking permission before doing magic. They ask permission from the tree, from the rock, from everything, and they seem so powerful, but that's the limitation imposed on their power, isn't it? That they have to be in balance. They even Asandir even rescues the one captain, knowing that he's going to be a bitter enemy, and letting him believe that it was Lysair that rescued him from the Grim Ward, right?
I have questions about that guy. I have
Okay.
questions about that guy because I wondered if that was just like what you said, Philip. Sulfin Everend. I
Dolphin
can't remember.
something. Evan.
Yeah. I wondered if he was planted by the Fellowship. And I also wondered, and this might, oh, okay, well, AP's, you've read ahead, so I'm going to say I'm
No,
probably
no,
wrong.
no.
Uh,
I'm listening. I want to hear your reasoning.
well, because the Fellowship said earlier in the book that they were going to cross paths with that particular person. And the other thing that I wondered about, and this could be just me not reading right, I don't know, but there was that whole entire scene where Mirn is going through Lysair's camp, remember? And that's when he steals the maps
Yeah.
and they're
Guitar and crack
yeah,
troops. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, and he ruins their arrows and dehomes their swords. When he's in that camp, it seemed to me like there was a captain who was helping him out. So I kind of wondered if that was, am I wrong about that? Like that was how I read it. I was like, there was somebody, because they talk about a large captain, and I got the sense that somebody there was helping him
Oh,
out.
he was afraid of meeting with that captain because he would recognize him. I think that might be
Oh,
what you were
okay.
picking up
You
on.
might be right about that. I
Yeah.
do know though with that Sulfin Everin guy though, they
Yeah.
also talk about how he and I might be saying his name wrong, I apologize, but they were saying something about how he was introduced to, I guess he was part of I don't know if he was in the Coriani orphanage or he was introduced to magic
Yes,
when he
you're
was
right.
younger.
You're right to have your radar up about him.
Hmm.
And I do think that the Fellowship is devious, as much as they are on the side of nature and the Praevians and all that. They can be very devious, and they're usually a few steps ahead of everybody else. I'm not sure what to make of him, but you're absolutely right. There have been hints that there's something more to this guy, and he's going to become. I think he's becoming kind of a priest figure, a warrior priest figure for Lysair's cause, and that that he was fake rescued by Lysair from the Grimward is going to put him in this position. It seems to have vaulted him into prominence at this point.
Yeah, it's really
This,
interesting. Sorry, go ahead, AP.
oh no, I was about to say this is where me having impatience and reading ahead is hampering me because I don't want to give hints either way about anything here that would give away something about this discussion.
Well, that's what you get for being naughty and reading ahead.
It's okay. I come up with some pretty bad conspiracy theories sometimes, so I'm ready to be wrong.
No,
Anyway.
fascinating insights into character and trying to place it into the complexity of the narrative. That is absolutely perfect. So some of them don't pan out, whatever, but what you are doing is something that I struggle and always have to work really, really hard to do because it doesn't come naturally to me to try and think of those things. And you do it so effortlessly and see these connections, and I'm like, oh, I want to be able to do that. But
Thank you.
the the important thing for me in so much of this is in seeing those characters and seeing those connections, and then starting to weigh up what it means, what it can mean, what it could mean. And then when we read on, we find out, oh, we were right about that, we were wrong about that. But when we see we were wrong about something, we say, oh, because it's that thing is linking to that. And I was it makes everything brighter and more cohesive because we're actually thinking about these threads in this narrative tapestry. And so never dismiss what you do as bad conspiracy theory.
Thank you.
This
Well, I have fun with them anyway. Even if I'm wrong, I have fun.
this is the beauty of thinking about the complexity of narrative. So I just wanted to say that about what you had said.
That
Thank
is
you.
well said. So there are a few other characters we probably should at least touch on. We mentioned Mern, and I think we highlighted his two big moments. One was scaling the tower and the whole interaction with Talith. The other was him going through the crack troop, the camp of the Ataran crack troops, and essentially sabotaging them and stealing plans that would help the clansmen to survive this terrible attack that was being planned. But is there anything else you wanted to touch on with Mern? I think he's going to have a role in the future. He's coming after Carrick. It sounds like the
That's
one
what it
who
sounded like. Yes. Okay, I'm
betrayed.
glad because that's what I
Yeah,
thought too. When he said that he wanted to get revenge on the person who caused I guess
betrayal.
yeah. And so I was like, is he talking about Catrick? I'm so glad you said that because that was my other theory. Okay.
Yeah, I think he's going
Um,
after Carrick. Yeah, and JP,
I,
anything else?
well, again, one of the things about Marin that I find fascinating here is someone who has sworn allegiance to Lysair and is betraying him. He's a traitor,
Yeah,
but he's a traitor
Orlando.
for the side. He's a traitor for the side that we agree with,
Yeah,
and that that's what I find so fascinating about so much of this. That we look at someone who is sabotaging his fellows, stealing plans to give to the enemy, but it's because he's a double agent or he's a secret agent who's doing these things. And how we justify certain acts and approve of them and go, yes, that was the right thing to do. He's opposing evil. But Lysair thinks that he's opposing evil. And it throws this back in our face time and time again by showing us these things in contrast to the other sequences. And Johanna made that brilliant point earlier on that Wurts doesn't put these scenes in just in any random order. That, and that's why when we get these moments, we go, oh, that was a great scene, and then we look at the next thing. Funny that that seems to be an echo of the previous scene, but told in a very different way with a different direction. Funny how that worked out in this book. Wurts just accidentally did that. Isn't that lucky? That so much of this is meticulously crafted where there are echoes, resonances, and deliberate dissonances created in how we're perceiving scenes. And Mern is a wonderful example of that. But also, I think one of the things I liked about his character, it shows the strength of character for someone to admit that they were wrong.
mm-hmm.
We see that developing. The one thing that we all wish that Lysair could do, we see the strength of character that Mern went, yeah, we were on the wrong side, but now I'm going to do the right thing. And I am now changing my mind. I have seen the evidence, I've reweighed the evidence, and I was wrong. And now I have to do this thing to make amends. And that, where his code of honor of the clansman is rigid in so many respects, but flexible enough to recognize that you can be wrong and you have to change and make amends. And that's something we see as a distinction in certain characters,
Yeah.
that rather than admit the error, they double down on it.
There's probably some self-interest too involved in the Bridian change of alliance, because they have to figure once they kill all these other clansmen, we're clansmen too. And we might be allied just because of circumstances, because we were mad at Arathon for blowing up our munitions place in our castle. I think they were mad because they got outfoxed. And we can see that Meren himself is quite a clever fellow. But that, yeah, I think they've realized that their position long term is probably better with Arathon, but also it's a matter of seeing the true character and realizing that Lysair is manipulative, whereas Arathon is somebody who's may seem like he has gotten the better of them in the past, but that he's actually a very honest person. So I love how she took this character, by the way, as a relatively minor character previously, and gave him a role here in this book and made him a very interesting, I think, aspect of this story. So
Yeah, that's a really
We
good point.
we haven't talked about the Grim Ward yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
magic.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to bring up something about the magic too, but we could talk about the Grimoire first, or do you want to talk about? Because I wanted to, maybe this is related and maybe it isn't, but speaking of noticing how words will write something and then write something else in close proximity, and it's probably not by coincidence. So I happened to notice at the beginning of the book that I think Seth Dakar is explaining how Seth Veer has, I had to write this down, that he has this consciousness connected to a network that makes him aware of all life or still matter on Ethera. And of
Yeah.
course, this relates later on to the Waystone and what happened with that. But what I thought was so interesting about that, and he also says that the seven suspect that blind spots are inserted by the Pravian creators. So I did make note of that too. But what I found so interesting about this idea about all still life or all life, he has own awareness of all life or still matter on Ethera, is the next section when we first come across Moriel in this book, that she has this internal dialogue or internal thought process about inanimate matter. She says, moment to moment, she denied the deductive lie. Inanimate matter could not quicken in sentient vibration. She would not permit an inert reality to rock off reason's track, slip the boundaries of discipline, and seduce her to embrace dreaming madness. And I thought that was so interesting because she sees it as there's no way to bring life into what's still matter. And which I find interesting because they use the quartzes. The quartz seems to hold resonance for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that works, but I thought it was interesting because it seemed to me as though I think that the impression I get is that the fellowship see it differently, and that there's also something later on about how one of the characters actually has a gift to be able to do that no one else, no other order can. No, I can't find the note about it. I'll have to see if I can find my note about that.
This is fascinating, Johanna, because I think you're bringing out that contrast again between the Coriathane and the Fellowship, and that is again about whereas with the Coriathane you see coercion, in their crystals. In the Waystone itself, you have thousands of these predecessors of Moriel trapped inside this crystal. Their wills or whatever are in there, and there's a maliciousness to it because of that. There's a kind of coercion to their magic, whereas with the Fellowship, there's permission. There is balance. They have this sacred. They're in tune with the world, and they have this sacred mission of bringing back the people who, or the entities that are the rightful dwellers in this place, the Paravians, whereas the humans are the interlopers. They're the ones colonizing, dominating, coercing. So I feel like that's going back to what we were talking about earlier. Did you find what you were looking for?
I couldn't find my exact note about this because I took a lot of notes, but I do know though that it was also stated that the Fellowship believed that all still matter originally came from sentient life. And so I thought that was an interesting link. And I think even though it doesn't seem like it's totally connected to the Grimoire, it could be, because I know that in the Grimoire, there is this idea that we are in this dissonant harmonic and that everything is auraless. So there's like maybe this lack of vibration, if you will.
It's to do with the dragons, right? That were there in the earlier age of the first age, I guess.
Oh, yes. So
we
the
can talk about
Grimoire, I think what I understood is that this was constructed out of a ghost dragon's dream, is what
crazy.
something like that.
Yeah. And
But
there we
there's
saw a
also,
skull. Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's really cool because something that comes up here and there about the world in this book is that there's a lot of history that you can't really see, that you can't, like there's a whole entire scene when at the very beginning of the book when Dakar is taking is it Kale? I don't remember which character it was now, where he's taking, and maybe it was Mirren. I can't remember which character it was. He takes them into the camp, and as he's walking along with that illusion of it just being sky or camp or cliff, and then it turns out to be the camp in disguise. He does this illusion spell. But there's this description of all of the, I don't know, in my mind, I pictured all of this like um, all of these like rocks and cliffs and crevices where once dragons were. And
Yeah.
yet you can't see the evidence of that. There was this idea about there was this whole history that had been there that you just can't quite see,
Yeah.
at least not with the normal vision. Maybe with Mage Set you could see more, but
Right.
I don't know. There was just a lot about history. And then I think the Grimoire, though, kind of shows you that that history is still alive in some sense.
AP, you are our draconian expert.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what are your thoughts on the Grimoire?
Well, one of the things that I quite enjoyed about this was there are a number of different series where dragons are linked to chaos, that they're sort of the opposite of order and structure, that they are so powerful that they rend the very fabric of reality.
Primal entities. Yeah.
Exactly. They and part of no, I expect a lot of this to be developed further and more deeply. These are just my initial thoughts, limited to this book and the earlier books. But there are two aspects. One that Johanna picked up on and was elucidating there, that history stays with us. Traumas from the past recur down generationally. The stones echo with what has happened in the past. And this is literally true in this world, that the stones remember the traumas and the history of the land. And we as beings, we're made of the same matter, that we all come from the same cosmic dust that formed stars and asteroids and planets and moons, that there is this point of connection between all of us. We are all of the same matter. And so this resonance and solidarity that should exist between all these forms of matter, that's kind of what the fellowship, in my mind, is closer to fostering. Whereas the Coriathé and the Coriani are, no, we're going to master these things. And we see when the resonance and memory of what they force these crystals to do, these foci, the focus for their power, that an element gets caught up, and that mastery, that domination, that domineering control and force to do something. That's why their foci are so twisted and are dangerous and frightening. And then with the Grimoire, we see this come to life. The dreams of dragons, they are so powerfully in tune with how everything works, that what they think, what they dream, can shape the reality around it. And this ward being put in place to try and contain the devastation of that. Because if this dragon is no longer fully conscious, if it's the echo of its mind, the resonance that has been left behind, it doesn't have the control that it once had. And so the Grimoire, these warding protections are necessary to protect the rest of the world from something that could spill forth and tear the fabric and nature of reality apart. And so I love this very primal essence that goes to the deep level of connection that we have with matter, and how matter can remember these traumas. And in a secondary world with magic, where you can literalize a lot of these things, we see it explored and exploded onto the page. And that dream world where the fabric of how we understand our intentions. So when we think of Arathon's party and their intentions going through the Grimoire, what they tried to do no harm, versus the group following. They tried to work with and follow the path of the Grimoire instead of forcing their way through the direction they wanted to go. And we see both those aspects. One pays off, they eventually get out. The other is destruction and destructive because the force, that violence that is brought in and is reflected back on those people.
Hmm.
So I find that entire thing fascinating, and I want to know more now about these creatures, the dragons, who are different from the Paravians. They are a different class, a different being, and we know there's this interaction between them. And we know that the Paravians weren't an entirely peaceful race because they built fortresses. So all of this is hinting at a tremendously deep backstory that I'm excited to explore.
Yeah. Well, we have to wind down, I think, fairly soon, but I think we haven't quite really covered Arathon yet. And some of my favorite moments here were related to him. For example, the scene when he awakens after he's rescued by Traith, who does, I love Traith and his raven, very cool. But the scene between Jirrit and Arathon, when Arathon is angry or pretending to be angry with him, and he awakens when Jirrit has been talking about how bonded he is. He's more my brother than my monarch, and the whole dialogue between them was very touching. I thought I got kind of emotional at that moment with Jirrit's loyalty and the compassion, and how they're trying to spare each other by by being mean to each other, and how Jirrit is trying to push Arathon into accepting his role, which is very difficult for Arathon because of his compassion and because he realizes a lot of people are going to get hurt trying to protect me. And he's trying to save them by being a meanie pants at times. And it's just so touching. I thought that was really beautifully done. That Arathon is at the end of this thing. I feel like he's realized that he can't escape this role that he's in, and that he's going off to try to find the Paravians. I'm very interested in what's going to happen with that.
Yes, I noticed quite a few times, and it was Jarrett, by the way, at the beginning of the story, who ends up going to find him because he has that
Yeah.
dream. He has some kind of prophetic dream.
That's right, and he
He's
crosses the whole continent to go warn him about this foreshadowing. Yeah,
And what does Arathon do? Go home.
yeah,
Get out of here.
yeah.
After he
Thanks.
leaves his wife and everything. It seems like Arathon is winning all this loyalty he doesn't want because he feels so guilty. And there's a lot in this story that comes up. I know Arathon says that at one point that Despair is his true enemy, and the Fellowship confirmed that later on. Despair is his enemy. Despair seems to be playing off that curse in some way. So, I mean, I guess the reason why Arathon seems so hardened, he doesn't want people to have to sacrifice themselves for him. I loved, and I know this doesn't have Arathon in the scene, but I really loved the scene with Ilera and is it Cardamom?
Hard one. Yeah,
Cardamom?
yeah,
Cardamom with that scene. I
yeah,
loved, I loved that. One, I loved her little cottage, the
yeah.
way that Words described it with the owl feathers in a vase and her clothes kind of like hanging lopsided on some deer antlers and some herbs, and it just seemed like the perfect herbalist boho cottage. I know boho wasn't really a style back then, but that's what came to my mind reading about it. Her boots right over here, her, what is it, the mint in her pillow, the lavender in her pillows. I loved that little scene. It was just so cozy. And I especially loved that what she brings up is that because of their psychic link from the the miracle magic, music magic that they performed together, that surgery they performed together, I think in the second book, she was saying that she still feels a link to Erathon as a result of performing magic together, and that she also warned about his despair and his guilt, the guilt that's crippling him from the past events, like from Vastmark and from the first book. And she's making a case that she thinks that the Fellowship should actually remove that oath that he should not take his life
Mm,
because she thinks they could trust him. And I loved that. I was like, that is true love because she doesn't know for sure that he would actually not take his own life out of guilt, but the fact that she wants him to be free to make his own decisions, and she truly believes in her heart, or
Yeah.
she's hopeful that he would stay alive, that he would stay true to, I guess, this bigger mission in some sense.
Yeah.
So I
I
thought that was a
love that.
beautiful exchange. Yeah.
I love that conflict built into her character at this point, because that isolation is a punishment, but it's also, she's relieved in a way because she knows that she could be a weapon used against Arathon at any moment. And so she wants to be with him, but she can't, and she's a wonderful character. We didn't see a ton of her in this book, but I'm very much hoping that we'll see a lot more of her in the next book. I hope, because she's a favorite of mine as well.
How about we lost AP.
We lost AP. I don't know if that was me or probably him, but he'll come back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He did look
Um,
awfully still there for a while.
Hmm. I and what about the opening of the book too, with Alara performing that
Yes.
birth scene?
Saving the kid for who was being born, and knowing that this kid is going to be bad news in some way, shape, or form for Arathon, because the Cirrus was there as well, giving his future, and saying, this kid is going to be really bad for your sweetheart, and I love that. And she saves the kid anyway, and we see her in moments playing with this kid. Obviously, she's become closer to this kid. And we don't know his significance yet, but it seems like he's going to be something in the future, which makes me think this is going to be a long, in chronology, the series is going to go quite a few more years. Yeah.
That's a good point. And I was curious about that too, because I think, didn't the kid have green eyes and the father had green eyes and dark hair?
So is he somehow related to Arathon, is what I thought that meant. And that Lyrenda realizes this and thinks, I can use this, and we had that whole prophecy in the beginning. So we go full circle in a way, because there's the prophecy of the Cirrus in the beginning saying, this kid's going to be bad news for your beloved. And Alara knows that means Arathon. And then we see the recognition that Lyrenda has that, green eyes. Maybe there are some more of Arathon's relatives running around here. So
Yeah, that was my assumption, but I don't know. I don't know.
well,
I was
probably AP
curious
knows,
about
but he's putting on an excellent poker face now.
Sorry about that. There was a power cut here, and
Oh,
I didn't hear anything of what you said because the battery kicked on, but the Wi-Fi went down, and I've just had to reboot everything, which is why I actually just sent a message saying I will try to get back as soon as I can. So I've been missing this entire discussion. I am very, very sorry.
oh, no
We
worries. I saw you freeze at a certain moment. You didn't miss much, actually. You're we
Why
just
were you talking? Because then, yeah, I'm okay with missing that.
well, Johanna did say something too. So
we were
Well, I'm
just
sorry
talking
I
about
missed that then.
yeah.
we were just talking about the opening birth scene with Lara.
Yeah, we're talking about Alara
Mhm.
mostly, and I'm hoping to see more of her in the next book, and I'm confident that I will.
Mhm.
Her moments were brilliant in this one, but they were very few and brief. But Joanna and I are agreeing that we love her character.
Yeah,
I think
fantastic. And
one of the things I would add is something that I find interesting is while Arathon and Lysaea are at the heart of everything, we're seeing this cycling through of different characters rising to prominence, maybe fading away for a while, then coming back. That the there are no it's not we are following this one story. It's this is the story of a world, and these people in different moments are the key people. And it's something that just seems so effortless in the story thus far that yeah, people rise in prominence, they become important to what's going on, and then there's no expectation that and now they're going to go on this quest and do this thing, that they can fade away again, that the role is passed to another person, there's an heir does this thing, someone else comes into frame, and there's this really nice balance between new characters being introduced, characters who had been previously introduced but being developed further, and following along with characters that we know without any of it seeming to spill out of control. I think one of the criticisms that is occasionally made of Jordan's Wheel of Time is that at a certain section in the series, it seems to expand out of control and then have to try and sort of be worked back in again. And some people have made a criticism of that similar sort of Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. And I'm not seeing that here, that there seems to be a really strong control of the narrative importance in these threads, as well as the characters moving in and out of frame. And I just wanted to point that out just as a minor thing.
Was generational too. Like earlier we saw Steven or the Cathdane, or however you say that, of Rathane, and now it's his son Jarrett, and there's so much trauma and there's legacy, all of that being inherited from the previous stuff. So going back to Curse of the Mistwraith, a lot of his relationship, Jarrett's relationship with Arathon, is a result of his father's relationship with Arathon. And I love that. And I anticipate that we'll see another generation or two, or who knows how many, because Arathon and Lysera are going to live a long life. It probably, about 500 years or so, I think, right? So fascinating. Anything
Yeah.
else you two want to talk about that we've missed?
I was just going to say, I also am curious about Phelan. I think that we're going to see more of
Oh, yeah.
her.
Yeah.
My thoughts about her are that I think she's a wildcracker and that something really big is going to happen with her later on. And I think she's probably not going to follow orders. That's kind of my worry about her. I was thinking she's either going to end very tragically or heroically, but we're going to see more of her.
Yeah. And Dakar, we haven't talked about a lot, but he really does do a lot in this book, right? He in his own bumbling way saves the day a couple times. Like that scene when in the inn when Arathon is being taken over by the curse, and poor Dakar is trying to fight him. It's quite a great scene. There's some comic relief in there, but there's also, you feel a real sense of danger for this character, who I honestly did not like Dakar very much until the previous book, War Host of Vastmark, when he and Arathon made this connection over the girl they were trying to save. And the girl passed away, but the connection remained. And I love how that has developed, this relationship now with Dakar and Arathon, and how Dakar keeps he kind of gets the short end of the stick a lot, I think, but he keeps soldiering on, and somehow or other, and he's missing his, and I increasingly understand his desire to drown himself, because if you know what's going to happen and you can't do anything about it, wouldn't you want to, just drown yourself in oblivion and not have to think about all that?
And also the feeling that he gets when he's overtaken by the visions, that they feel miserable. So
like a migraine.
Migraine, like I kind of know what that's like. That you can understand why he wants to run away from this, and also the responsibility of being the one to know. And what do you do with that? Do you tell the people and try to avert it, even though, can you avert the future? Do you not tell them and just let things work out how they should go? That if you could see visions of it, that constant dilemma would always be there. And he's studied with the fellowship, but it's not easy. They aren't great. He's never going to be one of them. And maybe that has led to him not being quite as dedicated to his lessons as he should have been. But if there's a closed club and someone says, oh yeah, you can be my apprentice, but you're never going to be one of us, what do you do? How do you deal with that? So he is becoming, again, deeper and more intricate and more fascinating. Initially, I thought of him very much as Planchet from The Three Musketeers, but he is a lot more complicated than that. And so I've been growing more, not necessarily fond, but invested in the car.
Final thoughts, Johanna?
On the book Or
Yes, or anything you want, whatever you want to throw out there. If we missed something.
I'm trying to think if there's anything we missed talking about. I'm sure there's more
Oh,
that
and
we
there's
could talk
plenty we
about.
missed. Yeah.
Probably tons, but no, I think I think we did well.
Okay. Very
Yeah.
good. All right. AP, any final thoughts?
My final thoughts on this would be, Johanna, as ever, an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Nemesis, you were here as well. I just wanted to thank you both. Like, this has been so much fun because I enjoy reading these books, but I enjoy talking about them with people. And the two of you bring very different perspectives to it. Like, we all focus on and interpret sections of it quite differently. And I genuinely love these. Thank you, Phil. I saw you change my name, Phil. So actually, you know
At least
what?
it's not Dr. Phil, right?
Thank you, Johanna. I enjoy the conversation with you. I put up with the conversation with the nemesis.
And
It's
with
been a
that,
pleasure to talk with both of you. So yay. Thank you.
yay. Yeah, we have our very neutral elvish assassin here. So, well, everyone, thank you for listening to us. This has been a fascinating journey so far, and I'm looking forward to finding out where this goes. And our next discussion will be hosted by, whose turn is it next?
I think it's my turn.
Okay.
I think it's my turn. Yeah.
I think that's correct. So Johanna is going to be hosting our next discussion, which will be on Grand Conspiracy as we continue in Arc 3, Alliance of Light. So thank you, everyone, for watching this, and hope you had as good a time as I did. And until next time.